The Sydney Opera House is a multi-venue performing arts centre on Sydney Harbour, located in Sydney, New South Wales, Australia. It is one of 20th century's most famous and distinctive buildings. Designed by Danish architect John Utzon, but completed by an Australian architectural team headed by Peter Hall. The building was formally opened on 20th of October 1973, after a gestation beginning with Utzon's 1957 selection as winner of an international design competition. The Government of New South Wales, led by the Premier, Joseph Cahill, authorised work to begin in 1958, with Utzon directing the construction. The government's decision to build Utzon's design is often overshadowed by circumstances that followed, including cost and scheduling overruns, as well as the architect's ultimate resignation. The building and its surroundings occupy the whole of Bennelong Point on Sydney Harbour, between Sydney Cove and Farm Cove, adjacent to the Sydney Central Business District and the Royal Botanic Gardens, and close by the Sydney Harbour Bridge. The building comprises multiple performance venues, which together host well over 1,500 performances annually, attended by more than 1.2 million people. Performances are presented by numerous performing artists, including 3 resident companies, Opera Australia, the Sydney Theatre Company, and the Sydney Symphony Orchestra. As one of the most popular visitor attractions in Australia, the site is visited by more than 8 million people annually, and approximately 350,000 visitors take a guided tour of the building each year. The building is managed by the Sydney Opera House Trust, an agency of the New South Wales Government. On the 28th of June 2007, the Sydney Opera House became a UNESCO World Heritage Site, having been listed on the now defunct Register of the National Estate since 1980, the National Trust of Australia Register since 1983, the Sydney of Sydney Heritage Inventory since 2000, the New South Wales State Heritage Register since 2003, and the Australian National Heritage List since 2005. Furthermore, the Opera House was a finalist in the New 7 Wonders of the World campaign list. The facility features a modern expressionist design, with a series of large precast concrete shells, each composed of sections of a sphere of 75.2 meters radius, forming the roofs of the structure, set on a monumental podium. The building covers 1.8 hectares of land and is 183 meters long and 120 meters wide at its widest point. It is supported on 588 concrete piers sunk as much as 25 meters below sea level. The highest roof point is 67 meters above sea level, which is the same height as that of a 22-story building. The roof is made of 2,194 precast concrete sections, which weigh up to 15 tons each. Although the roof structures are commonly referred to as shells, as in this article, they are precast concrete panels supported by precast concrete ribs, not shells in a strictly structural sense. Though the shells appear uniformly white from a distance, they actually feature a subtle chevron pattern composed of 1,056,006 tiles in 2 colors, glossy white and matte cream. The tiles were manufactured by the Swedish company Höganäs AB, which generally produced stoneware tiles for the paper mill industry. Apart from the tile of the shells and the glass curtain walls of the foyer spaces, the building's exterior is largely clad with aggregate panels composed of pink granite quarried at Tirana. Significant interior surface treatments also include off-form concrete, Australian white birch plywood supplied from the Wauchope in northern New South Wales, and brush box glulam. Both of the two larger spaces, the concert hall is in the western group of shells, the Joanne Sutherland Theatre in the eastern group. The scale of the shells was chosen to reflect the internal height requirements, with low entrance spaces rising over the seating areas up to the high stage towers. The smaller venues, the drama theatre, the playhouse, and the studio, are within the podium, beneath the concert hall. A smaller group of shells set to the western side of the monumental steps houses the Bennelong restaurant. The podium is surrounded by substantial open public spaces and the large stone-paved forecourt area with the adjacent monumental steps is regularly used as a performance space. Planning began in the late 1940s with Eugene Goossens, the director of the New South Wales State Conservatorium of Music, lobbied for a suitable venue for large theatrical productions. The normal venue for such productions, the Sydney Town Hall, was not considered large enough. By 1954, Goossens succeeded in gaining the support of New South Wales Premier Joseph Cahill, who called for designs for a dedicated opera house. It was also Goossens who insisted that Bennelong Point be the site. Cahill had wanted it to be on or near Wynyard Railway Station in the northwest of CBD. An international design competition was launched by Cahill on 13 September 1955 and received 233 entries, representing architects from 32 countries. The criteria specified a large hall seating 3,000 and a small hall for 1,200 people, each to be designed for different uses, including full-scale operas, orchestral and choral concerts, mass meetings, lectures, ballet performances, and other presentations. The winner, announced in 1957, was John Utzon, a Danish architect. According to legend, the Utzon design was rescued by noted Finnish-American architect Eero Saarinen from a final cut of 30 rejects. The runner-up was a Philadelphia-based team assembled by Robert Geertz and George Qualls, both teaching at the University of Pennsylvania School of Design. They brought together a band of Penn faculty and friends from Philadelphia architectural offices, including Melvin Breccia, Warren Cunningham, Joseph Mazzella, Walter Wiseman, and Leon Loschetta. Geertz, Breccia, Qualls, and Cunningham went on to found the firm GBQC Architects. The grand prize was 5,000 Australian pounds. Utzon visited Sydney in 1957 to help supervise the project. His office moved to Palm Beach, Sydney in February 1963. Utzon received the Pritzker Architecture Prize, architecture's highest honor, in 2003. The Pritzker Prize citation read, "There is no doubt that the Sydney Opera House is his masterpiece. It is one of the great iconic buildings of the 20th century, an image of great beauty that has become known throughout the world, a symbol for not only a city but a whole country and continent." Design and construction. The Fort Macquarie Tram Depot, occupying the site at the time of these plans, was demolished in 1958 and construction began in March 1959. It was built in 3 stages. Stage 1, 1959 to 1963, consisted of building the upper podium. Stage 2, from 1963 to 1967, the construction of the outer shells. And Stage 3, from 1967 to 1973, interior design and construction. Stage 1, podium. Stage 1 commenced on the 2nd of March 1959 with the construction firm Civil & Civic, monitored by engineers Over Rupp and Partners. The government had pushed for work to begin early, fearing that funding or public opinion might turn against them. However, Utzon had still not completed the final designs. Major structural issues still remained unresolved. By the 23rd of January 1961, work was running 47 weeks behind, mainly because of unexpected difficulties. Inclement weather, unexpected difficulty diverting stormwater, construction beginning before proper construction drawings had been prepared, changes of original contract documents. Work on the podium was finally completed in February 1963. The forced early start led to significant later problems, not least of which was the fact that the podium columns were not strong enough to support the roof structure, which had to be rebuilt. Stage 2. Roof. The shells of the competition entry were originally of undefined geometry, but early in the design process, the shells were perceived as a series of parabolas supported by precast concrete ribs. However, engineers Overup and partners were unable to find an acceptable solution to construct them. The formwork for using in situ concrete would have been prohibitively expensive, and because there was no repetition in any of the roof forms, the construction of precast concrete for each individual section would possibly have been even more expensive. From 1957 to 1963, the design team went through at least 12 iterations of the form of the shells to find an economically acceptable form, including schemes with parabolas, circular ribs, and ellipsoids, before a workable solution was completed. The design work of the shells involved one of the earliest uses of computers in structural analysis to understand the complex forces to which the shells would be subjected. The computer system was also used in the assembly of the arches. The pins in the arches were surveyed at the end of each day, and the information was entered into the computer so the next arch could be properly placed the following day. In mid-1961, the design team found a solution to the problem. The shells were all being created as sections from a sphere. This solution allows arches of varying length to be cast into a common mold, and a number of arch segments of common length to be placed adjacent to one another to form a spherical section. With whom exactly this solution originated has been the subject of some controversy. It was originally credited to Utzon. Overup's letter to Ashworth, a member of the Sydney Opera House Executive Committee, states, Utzon came up with an idea of making all the shells of uniform curvature throughout both directions. Peter Jones, the author of Overup's biography, states that the architect and his supporters alike claim to recall the precise Eureka moment. The engineers and some of their associates, with equal convictions, recall discussion in both central London and at Ove's house. He goes on to claim that the existing evidence shows that Arup's canvassed several possibilities for geometry of the shells, from parabolas to ellipsoids and spheres. Yuzo Mikami, a member of the design team, presents an opposite view in his book on the project, Utzon's Sphere. It is unlikely that the truth will ever be categorically known, but there is a clear consensus that the design team worked very well indeed for the first part of the project, and that Utzon's Arup and Ronald Jenkins, partner of the Ove Arup and partners responsible for the Opera House project, all played a very significant part in the design development. As Peter Murray states in the Saga of the Sydney Opera House, the two men in the team enjoyed a collaboration that was remarkable in its fruitfulness and, despite many traumas, was seen by most of those involved in the project as a high point of architect-engineer collaboration. The design of the roof was tested on scale models in wind tunnels at University of Southampton and later NPL in order to establish the wind pressure distribution around the roof shape in every high wind, which helped in the design of the roof tiles and the fixtures. The shells were constructed by Hornibrook Group, who were also responsible for construction in Stage 3. Hornibrook manufactures the 2,400 precast roofs and 4,000 roof panels in an on-site factory and also developed the construction processes. The achievement of this solution avoided the need for expensive formwork construction by allowing the use of precast units, and it also allowed the roof tiles to be prefabricated in sheets on the ground, instead of being stuck on individually at height. The tiles themselves were manufactured by the Swedish company Höganäs Keramik. It took 3 years of development to produce the effect Utzon wanted in what became known as the Sydney tile, 122 mm square. It is made from clay with a small percentage of crushed stone. Ove Arup and partners site engineers supervised the construction of the shells, which use an innovative adjustable steel truss erection arch, developed by Hornibrook's engineer Joe Bertini, to support the different roofs before completion. On 6th of April 1962, it is estimated that the Opera House will be completed between August 1964 and March 1965. Stage 3, the interiors, started with Utzon moving his entire office to Sydney in February 1963. However, there was a change of government in 1965, and the new Robert Askin government declared the project under jurisdiction of the Ministry of Public Works. Due to the ministry's criticism of the project's cost and time, along with their impression of Utzon's design being impractical, this ultimately led to his resignation in 1966. The cost of the project so far, in October 1966, was still only 22.9 Australian dollars, less than a quarter of the final $102 million cost. However, the projected cost for the design were at this stage much more significant. The second stage of construction was progressing toward completion when Utzon resigned. His position was principally taken over by Peter Hall, who became largely responsible for the interior design. Other persons appointed that same year to replace Utzon were E. H. Farmer as government architect, Diaz Littlemore and Lionel Todd. Following Utzon's resignation, the acoustic advisor, Lothar Kremer, confirmed to the Sydney Opera House Executive Committee that Utzon's original acoustic design allowed for only 2,000 seats in the main hall, and further stated that increasing the number of seats to 3,000 as specified in the brief would be disastrous for the acoustics. According to Peter Jones, the stage designer, Martin Carr, criticized the shape, height, and width of the stage, the physical facilities for artists, the location of the dressing rooms, the widths of doors and lifts, and the location of lighting switchboards. There will be a second episode. Have a nice day.